The most dangerous thing a man can do is fall in love with someone who can see through him. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Ava Kim noticed it the moment she stepped into her office on the 43rd floor of the Marquette building, not because it was conspicuous, but because it had been placed precisely in the center of her mahogany desk, aligned with the edges, a white rectangle so deliberate it might as well have been a declaration of war. Her assistant, Priya, had a habit of leaving correspondence in a haphazard stack near the phone. This was not Priya's doing. Ava set her coffee down slowly. She pulled off her coat, hung it on the brass hook behind the door, smoothed the front of her charcoal blazer. Then she walked to the desk and picked up the envelope. The return address read, Hargrove, Lund and Associates, Attorneys at Law, 200 South Wacker Drive, Chicago, IL. She recognized the firm. Everyone in Chicago who read above the fold recognized the firm. Hargrove, Lund and Associates had defended 3 aldermen, 2 state senators, 1 federal judge who should have known better, and an uncomfortable number of men whose names appeared in indictments alongside words like racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit. Ava opened the envelope with the small silver letter opener she kept more as an aesthetic choice than a practical one, and withdrew a single sheet of cream-coloured stationery. Dear Dr. Kim, my client, Mr. Marco D'Angelo, has been advised by this office to seek ongoing psychiatric consultation as part of a cooperative wellness initiative. We have reviewed your credentials and professional history and believe your practice is well suited to his needs. Mr. D'Angelo is prepared to compensate you at 2.5 times your standard hourly rate. Please find enclosed a retainer. We hope you will consider this arrangement favorably. Regards, Richard Hargrove, Esquire. The check was for $15,000. Ava placed it on the desk beside the letter. She picked up her coffee. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the grey sprawl of Chicago below, the river cutting its silver thread between the towers. And she thought very carefully. She had been practicing psychiatry for 11 years. She had treated veterans and executives, celebrities and criminals, people who believed they were being watched by satellites, and people who genuinely were. She had a waiting list 6 months long, and a reputation for discretion so thorough it had become almost mythological. She charged $400 an hour. 2.5 times that was $1,000. The check was for 15 sessions, paid in advance. She thought about the name, Marco D'Angelo. She would have had to be living in a sensory deprivation tank not to know it. The D'Angelo family had been a fixture of Chicago's underworld for 2 generations, a fact that was simultaneously an open secret and a legal impossibility, since no D'Angelo had ever been convicted of anything more serious than a 2009 tax irregularity. Marco D'Angelo had taken control of the family's legitimate holdings, and the whisper quotes around that word could fill an auditorium, at the age of 32, following his father Carmine's death from what the coroner called cardiac arrest and what everyone else called pragmatism. He was now 38. He owned 3 restaurants, a logistics company, a real estate development firm, and, according to 2 years of quiet federal investigation that Ava absolutely should not have known about, roughly 40% of the Port Authority's unofficial economy. She had a friend in the FBI's Organized Crime Division, Sarah Chen. They'd gone to Northwestern together. Sarah called sometimes, not officially, just to keep channels warm. She'd mentioned D'Angelo twice in the past year. The second time, her voice had carried the particular flatness of someone choosing every word with surgical care. Ava turned from the window and picked up her phone. "Priya," she said, when her assistant answered. Please call Richard Hargrove at Hargrove Lunt and tell him I can accommodate a new client. Initial consultation next Wednesday, 4 o'clock. She paused. And Priya, find out whatever you can about the appointment booking. I want to know if Mr. D'Angelo makes it himself or if someone makes it for him. She already knew the answer. Men like Marco D'Angelo did not make their own appointments. Men like Marco D'Angelo sent letters on cream stationery with checks for $15,000 and expected the world to rearrange itself accordingly. What interested Ava was not the money, not the power, not the mythology. What interested Ava was the lawyer's phrasing. Cooperative Wellness Initiative. That was the language of mitigation, the particular verbal choreography of legal strategy. Marco D'Angelo was going to therapy not because he wanted to, and not because he needed to. He was going because someone had told a judge he would. Ava Kim had been practicing psychiatry for 11 years. She had never once been anyone's performance. She did not intend to start. But she would take the meeting. Because, in her experience, the men who came to therapy under duress, certain they had nothing to learn and nothing to reveal, those were always the ones who cracked open like fault lines. Not in the first session, not even in the fifth, but eventually. Always eventually. She slid the check back into the envelope, set it in her drawer, and opened her calendar. Wednesday, 4 o'clock. She wrote his name in the slot with her fountain pen, in letters so small and careful they looked almost like a warning. The first call came from Sarah Chen at 9 that evening. Ava was at home, her apartment in Lincoln Park, the one with the 2 tall ceilings and the wall of bookshelves she'd been adding to since residency, the one that smelled like sandalwood and Earl Grey, and somewhere underneath both of those, old paper. She was reading. She answered on the second ring. "You took him," Sarah said. Not a question. "Good evening to you too." "I'm serious, Ava." "I took a consult with a prospective client, yes." Ava turned down the page corner of her book, something she did only when she expected a conversation to run long. "I haven't committed to anything. He's going to try to use you." "I'm aware." "No, I mean use you. As a piece. His lawyer is building a narrative. Marco D'Angelo is a businessman under stress who voluntarily sought mental health treatment. It's for the grand jury. It's optics." I gathered. There was a pause. Ava could hear the background noise of Sarah's office, the soft percussion of keyboards, someone's coffee machine. The FBI's Chicago field office apparently ran on caffeine and contained anxiety at all hours. "You understand what he's actually being looked at for?" Sarah said. "I have a general sense." 3 murders, Ava. We think. Probably more. Labour union infiltration, ports, freight, maybe some pharmaceutical distribution on the side. He's careful. He's very, very careful. 12 years, 3 different task forces, and we have circumstantial on maybe 15% of it. Then he's not charged with murder. Not yet. Sarah. Ava's voice was gentle but firm. The voice she used in session when a patient was catastrophizing. "He's a prospective client with a referral from his attorney. I am a licensed psychiatrist. There is nothing illegal about me meeting with him. There's nothing illegal about putting your hand in a bear trap either. Good night, Sarah." "Ava, I'll be careful." She hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her lap, looking at nothing in particular. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, Chicago made its perpetual noise, sirens at distance, the low moan of a train, rain beginning to tick against the windows. She picked up her book again, but she didn't read. She sat there in the lamplight, thinking about a man she hadn't met yet, a man she knew only as a name on cream stationery and a whisper in a federal agent's careful voice. And she felt something she couldn't quite name settling in her chest. Not fear. She examined it with clinical precision and ruled fear out. Something closer to attention, the sharpening of focus that preceded a difficult case. She told herself that was all it was. She was not a woman who allowed herself to be wrong about herself for long. But she would allow herself this one small miscalculation, just for now. He was early. This surprised her. In her experience, people who were sent to therapy rather than choosing it arrived late, sometimes by minutes, sometimes by weeks, sometimes by never coming at all. The lateness was a form of protest, the last assertion of autonomy against a process they resented. She had a patient once, a COO, referred by his board following a workplace incident, who spent 4 sessions sitting in his car in the parking garage before finally appearing in her waiting room with the particular expression of a man being led to a firing squad. Marco D'Angelo arrived 12 minutes early. Priya buzzed back at 3:48. "Your 4 o'clock is here." Ava was reviewing notes from her previous session, a routine she used to create a mental reset between patients. She closed the folder, straightened the single yellow legal pad on her desk, and made herself wait until precisely 4 o'clock before pressing the intercom. "Please send him in." The door opened. She had seen the photographs. Chicago magazine had run a profile 2 years ago, the legitimate businessman version, all open collars and renovated warehouses, a caption about urban development initiatives. The photographs had not done what photographs rarely manage to do, which was convey physical presence. Marco D'Angelo had presence, the way certain buildings had presence, the kind that made you recalibrate the space around him. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the particular build of a man who kept himself physically capable out of habit rather than vanity. Dark hair, cut short on the sides, longer on top, the beginning of silver at the temples. A face that would have been conventionally handsome had it not been for something in the arrangement of it, some quality of stillness that made handsome feel like entirely the wrong word. A jaw like it had been carved for a specific purpose, eyes so dark they were nearly black, and carrying in them a quality of assessment that she recognized from one other context, the way she herself looked at patients. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons of his white shirt open. No pocket square, no watch she could see, no visible indication of wealth except the suit itself, which had been made for him specifically and moved with him like a second skin. He looked at her office in a single, slow sweep, taking inventory, she noted, not with curiosity, but with the habitual threat assessment of a man who checked every room he entered. Then he looked at her. "Dr. Kim," he said. His voice was low, Chicago-inflected, with something else underneath, the particular musicality of a household where Italian was spoken. "Mr. D'Angelo." She gestured to the chair across from her, the deep leather one she'd chosen deliberately because it was comfortable without being casual. "Please, sit." He sat. Not with the stiffness of someone uncomfortable in the space, and not with the performed relaxation of someone pretending to be comfortable. He sat the way he'd walked in, with complete authority over his own body, as if furniture existed for his convenience and not the other way around. Ava settled into her own chair, legal pad on her knee. "I appreciate you making time," he said. "Of course." She let a brief silence settle before she continued. "Before we begin, I want to be transparent about something. In cases where a patient is referred by legal counsel rather than arriving by personal choice, I find it helps to address that directly." She paused. "Are you here because your lawyer told you to be?" Something moved in his eyes. Not offense, something more like amusement, partially suppressed. "Yes," he said. "And is that the only reason?" He tilted his head slightly. "Would it matter if it was?" "It would affect how we structure our time together." He looked at her for a long moment. The quality of his attention was unusual, focused, unhurried, the way a very intelligent man listened when he had decided the conversation was worth his actual concentration rather than his performance of concentration. Most people, in her experience, listened in order to respond. He appeared to listen in order to understand. "You want to know if I'm going to waste your time," he said. "I want to know how honest you're willing to be." He leaned back slightly. The leather chair absorbed the shift of his weight. "I'm told you're discreet. Completely. Told you're good." "I've been told the same thing." The corner of his mouth moved. "Is that confidence or arrogance?" "I find that distinction less interesting than most people do." She let her pen rest against the pad. "Mr. D'Angelo, I've been practicing for 11 years. In that time, I've treated people who came to me voluntarily and people who came to me under varying degrees of compulsion. The ones who arrive under compulsion and decide to use the time honestly are often the patients who make the most significant progress. The ones who treat it as a box to check leave exactly as they arrived." She looked at him steadily. "I charge $1,000 an hour. If you want to spend that money performing therapy rather than doing it, that's your prerogative. But I won't pretend it's the same thing." Silence. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully decode, which she found interesting because she could nearly always decode an expression. "My lawyer is building a case," he said finally. "Part of that case involves demonstrating that I'm a person who takes his mental health seriously." "I understand. I want to be clear about that." "Transparency is appreciated," she made a small note. "And is there anything else? Beyond the legal strategy?" Another pause, longer this time. "I've been told," he said slowly, "that I have certain tendencies that affect people around me." "What kind of tendencies?" "Control." The word came out flat, without inflection. "I have been told that I have a need for control that occasionally affects my relationships." "Who told you that?" He looked at her. "The last woman who left me." Ava wrote nothing. She simply held the space. "How long ago was that?" she asked. 14 months. "Was it difficult?" "No." The answer was immediate, instinctive. Then something shifted in his face, barely perceptible, a tightening around the eyes. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not sure I know the difference between something being difficult and simply being inconvenient." Ava looked at him for a moment. This was the first crack. 14 minutes in, one small fissure in the surface. The admission that he might not be able to read his own emotional experience accurately. Most patients took months to arrive at that admission. Some never did. That's a very honest thing to say, she said. Don't do that, he said. Do what? Reward me for honesty like I'm a child who brought home a good grade. The frankness of it startled her. She made a note. Fair point. I apologize. He studied her. Do you normally apologize to patients? When I'm wrong, yes. And when you're right? Then I wait. He looked at her for a long, considered moment. Then he said, I think I might actually come back next week. Ava kept her expression level. Thursdays at 4 work for you? Thursdays at 4. He rose from the chair with the same economy of motion with which he'd done everything else. Ava stood as well, professional habit. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm without being demonstrative, the handshake of a man who had nothing to prove. His hand was warm. She released it with the same measured calm with which she did everything in this room. Dr. Kim, he said at the door. Mr. D'Angelo. He left. Ava sat back down and looked at her legal pad. She had written 4 lines. Usually she filled 3 pages in a first session. She looked at the 4 lines. Legal strategy. Clear motivation stated up front. Control. Identified by partner, not self. Emotional differentiation. Difficulty/inconvenience. Alexithymia or learned dissociation. Corrected me, unprompted. She stared at the last line for a long time. Then she turned to a fresh page and wrote at the top, D'Angelo, Marco, initial session. And underneath that, in smaller letters, as if writing it quietly might make it matter less. Proceed with extreme care. The black SUV was parked across the street. Ava noticed it 3 days after her first session with Marco D'Angelo, on a Saturday morning when she was walking to the farmer's market on Green City. She would not have noticed it at all, except that it was parked in a loading zone, improperly technically, and when she passed it, the driver's window lowered 2 inches. Not enough to see the person inside, just enough to be noticed. She kept walking. Her pulse stayed even. She bought tomatoes and good sourdough and a bunch of dahlias in a colour between orange and red, and on the way home she took a different route. Not because she was frightened, but because she was a person who liked to have information, and information included knowing whether a vehicle was following her or simply parked. It didn't follow her. That evening she called Sarah. Is the Bureau watching me? She asked. A pause. Why would you ask that? Sarah. Ava, if we were conducting any kind of surveillance, I'm not asking if you're watching D'Angelo, I'm asking if you're watching me. A longer pause. Are you seeing him? I had an initial consult. Jesus, Ava. I am going to take him as a patient. He met diagnostic criteria for productive engagement, he was honest about his legal strategy, and he presented with indications of genuine emotional avoidance that are worth exploring. She paused. And yes, I noticed the car. That wasn't us, Sarah said. That sounds like his people. His people. D'Angelo has a security detail, 2 guys usually, one drives, one watches. He also has people who watch the people around him. It's how he operates. If he's decided you're relevant to him, his people will have looked at you already. Ava processed this. What does looked at you mean? Background, associates, living situation. It's not threatening, necessarily. It's surveillance. Yes, Sarah said. It's surveillance. Ava stood at her kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street below, the dahlias in a vase on the sill, the Saturday afternoon stillness of the neighbourhood. And this is his normal operating procedure. For people who matter to him, Sarah's voice was careful again. Ava, he had someone in your building checked out. The super got a call asking about building security. This was Friday, the day after their session. Okay, Ava said. That's all you have to say. Okay. What would you like me to say? I'd like you to say you're going to refer him out. I'm not going to refer him out. Ava, he's a patient. He gets the same consideration any patient gets. If the Bureau needs me to do something different, I'll need that request in writing, through proper channels, with a judge's signature, and routed through my attorney. She picked up a dahlia from the counter, one that hadn't made it into the vase, and turned it in her fingers. Was there anything else? You're going to be careful, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. I'm always careful. Not like this. Ava looked at the flower, deep orange, red at the centre. Good night, Sarah. She put the dahlia in water and went back to her reading. But later that night, after midnight, she stood at the window of her dark bedroom and looked at the street below. And she let herself consider, fully and without the armour of clinical detachment, the fact that a man she had spent 60 minutes with had sent someone to check the security of her building. She considered how she felt about that. The honest answer was complicated. There was something that was unambiguously concerning, the power implicit in that action, the casual confidence of a man who treated the boundaries of other people's lives as permeable. She noted it. She would address it. But there was also, underneath that, she was a psychiatrist, she was required to be honest with herself about this, something else. Something that had no clean clinical name. The sensation of being seen, of mattering specifically to a very specific kind of person. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she went to bed and told herself with professional certainty that she had filed that sensation correctly under counter-transference risk and would monitor it accordingly. Monday morning, her office door opened at 9:15 without her assistant having buzzed first. A man entered, tall, wide through the shoulders, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit because the shoulders were built for something different than suits were built for. He had a flat face and the particular calm of someone who had learned stillness as a professional skill. Mr. Ava began. I'm Carlo, the man said. I work for Mr. D'Angelo. I gathered. Ava kept her hands still on her desk. You're aware that walking into a psychiatrist's office unannounced is not appropriate under any circumstances? Yes, ma'am. He didn't seem troubled by this. Mr. D'Angelo wanted me to give you this. He set a small white box on her desk, a card beside it. Ava looked at the box. She didn't touch it. What is it? Pastries. From Ferrara's on Taylor. He said you mentioned something about he thought you might like them. She hadn't mentioned anything about pastries. She had mentioned in passing, while discussing emotional associations with childhood, that her mother had kept a bakery in the Korean neighbourhood near her childhood home, and that baked goods carried a particular emotional resonance for her. That had been 20 minutes into the session. He had remembered that detail. He had acted on it. 3 days later, she looked at the card, written in a slanted, forceful hand, for Dr. Kim. M. She looked up at Carla. Please tell Mr. D'Angelo that I appreciate the gesture. Also tell him that gifts between patients and therapists create complications that are professionally problematic. I would prefer he not send further gifts." She paused. "And tell him that his staff is welcome to make appointments with my assistant, not to walk in unannounced." Carlo absorbed this without visible reaction. "I'll tell him." "Thank you. Please see yourself out." He did. Ava sat very still for a moment after the door closed. Then, because she was alone, because no one would see, she opened the box. Sfogliatelle, golden and flaky, the kind that required a specific Neapolitan technique that only 3 places in Chicago did correctly. They smelled extraordinary. She ate one, and made a note in his file. Paying attention. Acts on detail. Boundary test, passive. Addressed directly. Will watch for escalation. Underneath, after a moment's consideration, she added, Sfogliatelle. Excellent. She did not share that detail with anyone. The second session ran differently from the first. He arrived at exactly 4 o'clock this time, not early, precisely on time, as if he'd stood somewhere nearby and waited for the exact moment. He wore navy this time, a different suit, the same absence of a tie, the same deliberate openness at the collar. Ava had debated with herself about the pastries for 3 days. She had decided not to raise them at the start, to see if he raised them. He didn't. He sat down, settled into the leather chair, and looked at her with that quality of contained attention that she was beginning to recognize as his baseline. Not warmth, exactly, but intensity. Interest. The specific interest of a man who was accustomed to understanding everything in his environment and had encountered something he didn't. "Before we begin," Ava said, "I want to address the gift." He didn't look surprised. He had known it would come up. "I offended you," he said. "You didn't offend me. You created a complication." She kept her voice level. Gifts from patients to therapists introduce elements of transaction into a relationship that works precisely because it isn't transactional. If you send me things, it affects the dynamic in here. He was quiet for a moment. "I was told you mentioned your mother's bakery." "You were told," she said. "By whom?" He looked at her. The look said, "You know the answer to that." "You had someone pull a transcript of our session," she said. "I had someone pull my own notes. I take notes after significant conversations." This stopped her. "You take notes." "I have for years. I have a poor memory for detail when I'm engaged." A small pause on the word, as if it had cost him something. "I go back and review what was said, what I noticed, what I might have missed." Ava looked at him with genuine interest that she kept carefully off her face. "That's a very unusual habit." "It's sufficient. It's also, in a different context, what therapists do. We take notes to capture what we might otherwise process too quickly." He was quiet again. She waited. "What does that mean?" he asked finally. "It means you're more introspective than you've allowed yourself to think." She watched the subtle change in his expression. "You said last week you had difficulty distinguishing difficulty from inconvenience. But the fact that you review your own conversations suggests that on some level you do register emotional significance. You're just cataloguing it separately from your conscious experience." "I don't know what that means." "It means you feel things, Mr. D'Angelo. You feel them, and then you put them in a folder and close it. And you look at the folder later, when you can approach it like a problem to be solved, rather than an experience to be had." The silence this time had a different quality. She had landed somewhere real. "Tell me about your father," she said. The change in him was subtle, a slight shift in how he held himself, a tightening that was not quite stiffness, but belonged to the same family. "Why?" "You took control of the family business after his death. You were 32. "Yes." "Were you ready?" "I was prepared." "Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said, "they're not." "Were you close with him?" "He was thorough," Marco said finally. "He believed in comprehensiveness, in preparing for outcomes. He taught me that sentiment was a vulnerability." "And do you believe that?" "I believed it for a long time." "What changed?" "The woman I mentioned, the one who left." He picked up a non-existent piece of lint from his knee, a gesture she filed carefully, the only fidget she'd seen him make. She said I treated people like assets to be protected rather than people to be known. He set his jaw. She wasn't wrong. She was leaving, and she still wasn't wrong, and I knew she wasn't wrong, and I couldn't do anything about it. Why not? Because I didn't know how. The words came out quiet, not soft, he didn't have a soft register, but quieter than his usual voice, the way a sound becomes different when it comes from a deeper place. "I have run extremely complex operations. I have managed significant interests. I have handled situations that required a particular kind of decisiveness." He looked at his hands briefly. "I cannot tell you what I actually want from another person without it feeling like a security risk." Ava was very still. She let the words sit in the room. "Why a security risk?" she asked gently. "Because wanting something means it can be taken." She wrote nothing. She just looked at him. "Who taught you that?" His jaw moved. "Carmine De Angelo, his father, said with the detachment of a man referring to a business school case study. But underneath that detachment, she could hear it, the way you could hear a river beneath ice if you pressed your ear to the surface, something raw and unresolved. "How did your father express affection?" she asked. Marco looked at her with an expression she could only call discomfort. Not the performed discomfort of a man being dramatic, the genuine discomfort of someone whose foot has found a step that isn't there. "He ensured that I had what I needed." That's not affection, that's provision. In his world, they were the same thing. "And in your world?" He looked at her for a long time. "I don't know," he said finally. "That might be what I'm here to find out." Ava made a note, a real note this time, filling half the page. When he left at 5 o'clock, he paused at the door as he had done the week before. "The pastries," he said. "You ate one." She looked at him. "I did." "Were they good?" "They were exceptional." He looked at her for a moment, not in a way she could define or categorize, which was becoming a recurring frustration, and then he left. Ava stood at the window after he was gone, watching without seeing, her pen loose in her hand. She thought about the note she'd made on his file after the first session. "Proceed with extreme care." She underlined it. Sarah Chen arrived at Ava's office on a Thursday, not a session day, a Thursday 2 weeks into treatment, without an appointment, but with what she called professional courtesy, which was the FBI's phrase for, "We are going to have this conversation whether you like it or not." She was 40, Korean-American like Ava, with the specific brand of composure that 12 years in federal law enforcement built into a person. She dressed like a person who didn't want to look like a federal agent, which meant she dressed like someone who had tried very hard to look normal and achieved only the look of someone trying hard. Today it was a navy blazer, dark jeans, shoes with no heel. She carried a leather folio that she set on Ava's desk with a deliberate thud. "I'm going to need you to listen," she said. "I'm going to need you to have made an appointment," Ava replied. "Ava? I'm a psychiatrist, Sarah. My schedule is, he's escalating." Sarah sat down in the patient chair, which no one but patients was supposed to occupy, and Ava felt the small violation of it, even as she said nothing. "In the last 3 weeks, since he started seeing you, there have been 2 incidents on the south side that we think are related to D'Angelo's operations. 1 man in the ICU, 1 not recoverable." Ava kept her expression still. "That has nothing to do with our sessions," she said. "How do you know?" "What does he talk about?" "You know I can't." "I know the exceptions to privilege, Ava. Imminent danger. If he says something in those sessions that indicates, he has not indicated anything imminently dangerous." Ava's voice was careful, precise, the voice she used when precision mattered more than warmth. "He discusses his emotional history, his family relationships, his patterns of attachment." She paused. "The things he's disclosed are not exceptional for a man with his background and his psychological profile." Sarah looked at her sharply. "You're analysing him." "I'm treating him." "And you don't think there's a difference?" "Not in the context of doing my job." Sarah leaned forward. "Ava, I need you to understand something. If this goes to trial, and we believe it will, his lawyer is going to use your notes, your testimony, possibly. The fact that he's in therapy, the tone of what he's disclosed, all of it becomes part of a narrative that says Marco D'Angelo is a thoughtful, self-aware man who sought help voluntarily." She paused. "None of that will be true. Whether or not it's true is not something I can determine. He is in therapy. He is engaged. He is—" She stopped. Sarah looked at her. "He is what?" Ava looked at her legal pad. "He is making genuine progress," she said. "Whatever the initial motivation, the engagement has been real." A long silence. "Ava," Sarah said, and her voice had changed, quieter. "How are you feeling about this patient?" "Professionally invested," Ava said immediately. "That's a very fast answer." "It's the accurate answer." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. "Be honest with me, not as a source, as your friend." Ava was quiet. "He's interesting," she said finally. "He's the most controlled person I've treated in 11 years, and underneath that control there are depths. Things he doesn't have language for because he was never given language for them. That's interesting to me clinically." She held Sarah's gaze. "That is the full extent of it." Sarah didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. She stood, retrieved her folio. "I'm going to tell you something officially," she said, "so you can tell your attorney I told you. The Bureau is watching D'Angelo, not incidentally, actively. If you have contact with him outside of formal sessions, in any context, if he takes you to dinner, calls your cell phone, sends his driver to pick you up, any of it, I need you to tell me. That's not going to happen. If it does, It won't. Sarah looked at her one more time at the door, the look of someone who has said what needed to be said and has not been believed, but has run out of arguments. "He's charming, Ava," she said. "People like that, they make you feel like you're the only one who really sees them. It's not an accident." Ava said nothing. "It's a skill," Sarah finished. She left. Ava sat alone in her office for a long time after that. The afternoon light angling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city humming below her. She thought about skill versus genuine disclosure, the line between them, whether the line was as clear as she'd always believed. She picked up her pen and opened Marco's file. She added one line at the bottom of the session notes. "Review countertransference indicators, weekly." Then she closed the file and saw her next patient. The fourth session was on a Thursday, and on the Friday following, Ava attended a fundraiser at the Art Institute, a benefit for a children's literacy organisation she'd supported for years, and Marco D'Angelo was there. She saw him before he saw her, or she thought she did. Later, she would revise that assumption. He was across the main gallery, in the colonnade of light that fell through the high windows onto the marble floor, standing with 3 men in suits and a woman in a red dress who appeared to be trying very hard to hold his attention. He was listening to one of the suited men with that particular quality of still focus she'd come to recognize, and even across a crowded room, in the organized chaos of a catered event, he was the fixed point that everything else seemed to orbit. Ava accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray and moved deliberately to the far side of the gallery. It took him 11 minutes to appear at her elbow. "Dr. Kim," he said. She kept her voice pleasant. "Mr. D'Angelo, I didn't realize you supported this organization." "I support a number of cultural institutions," he said. "I recently joined the board of the Literacy Foundation. The director is a friend." He paused. "Are you a long-time supporter?" 7 years. He looked at her with that expression she still couldn't fully decode. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I believe you," she said, which was not entirely true, but was the professionally correct response. "And if I had expected you to be here? Then I'd have wanted to discuss it in session." The corner of his mouth. "Even now, always working." "It's not work when it's a genuine concern." She turned to face him more directly, keeping her voice low enough that the surrounding conversation swallowed it. "You understand that seeing each other outside of our sessions creates complications." "I understand that," he said. "I'm not sure how to prevent the complication of existing in the same city." "You don't need to prevent it. You need to be aware of it." She looked at him steadily. "Is there anything you'd like to say right now that you should save for Thursday?" He looked at her. Something moved across his face, something that in a different man she might have called vulnerability. And she refused to call it that, because she was in a gallery full of people, and she had no clinical support here, no notes, no professional framework. "You looked across the room at me," he said, "before I came over. That's not a question." "No." He looked at her. "You looked at me and moved in the other direction." "Yes." "Why?" "Because this is not the appropriate context for us to interact." "And yet here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. The party moved and murmured around them. "You're not afraid of me," he said. Not an accusation, an observation with something in it that sounded almost like, "No," she said. "I'm not. Most people are. I know. That doesn't concern you? Should it? He looked at her for a long time. She held the look. She had been holding difficult looks in difficult rooms for 11 years. She was very good at it. No, he said finally. I don't think it should. He excused himself with a slight incline of his head, not a bow, something more contained than that, an acknowledgement, and returned to his associates. Ava stayed for another 40 minutes. She did not look in his direction again, or she tried not to. And when she did look, once, at the end, he was watching her from across the room with an expression she filed under unresolved and carried home in her chest like a splinter she couldn't find.
The fifth session, the following Thursday, he sat down and said without preamble,
I thought about you on Sunday. Ava wrote nothing. Tell me about that. I was at a dinner, business, 12 people around a table, and I was thinking. He stopped, looked out the window. I was thinking about what you said, the thing about the folder, cataloguing instead of experiencing. What were you feeling at the dinner? Impatience. He looked back at her. Boredom. I run these dinners because I'm supposed to run them, because the business requires them. And I sat there thinking about. He stopped again. About what? About what it would be like to want to be somewhere. A pause. I haven't wanted to be somewhere in a long time. And was there somewhere you wanted to be? She asked carefully. He looked at her. She looked back. The room held the question between them like something fragile, and she was aware, with acute professional clarity, that she needed to be very careful with what came next. I wanted to be somewhere quiet, he said finally, having a conversation that actually landed somewhere. Ava breathed. That's progress, she said. Wanting something real is progress. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite satisfaction and not quite sadness, but lived in the territory between them. Is it? He said. Yes, she said. It is. 6 weeks into treatment, Marco arrived at session and didn't speak for 4 minutes. Ava was accustomed to silence. In some practices, silence was the most productive use of the room.
She sat with her legal pad and her pen, and her own stillness,
and she let the 4 minutes pass the way weather passed, not resisting it, not forcing it forward. He was dressed differently today. Still impeccably, he appeared to own no clothes that were not impeccable. But his jacket was off, something she hadn't seen before, draped across the back of the chair. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. Something had happened before he came here, something that had not fully resolved. My nephew, he said at last. She waited. He's 19. My brother Luca's youngest. A pause. He came to me last week. He asked to be involved in certain aspects of the business. And how did you respond? I said no. The answer was flat, final. And then, after a moment, I said no, and I didn't explain it, and he left angry, and I've been. He stopped, his hands resting on his knees, pressed slightly. I've been thinking about whether I handled that correctly. What's your instinct? My instinct is that I was right, that the safest thing for him is distance from certain, he chose words carefully, aspects of the operation. And your doubt? My doubt is that he needed an explanation, that I treated him the way my father treated me, as though information was a liability rather than something owed. Ava watched him. You felt that your father withheld information from you. My father withheld everything from me until I needed to know it. He believed that preparation and explanation were different things. His jaw tightened. I could execute any task he gave me. I could not tell you why. And now you find yourself doing the same thing. Yes. The word dropped like a stone. I recognized it at the moment it was happening, and I still did it, and I don't. A pause. I don't know how to stop doing things I can see are wrong while I'm doing them. This was significant. She chose her words carefully. That recognition, in the moment, is actually more advanced than it sounds. Most people don't see the pattern until it's over. You're seeing it in real time. The gap between seeing and changing is the work we're doing. He looked at her, something in his eyes that she was slowly learning to read, a quality of openness that appeared only briefly and only when something had struck somewhere true. Tell me about a moment when someone explained something to you, she said. Not a business lesson, a personal one. Something your father explained, or your mother, or anyone. He was quiet for a long time. My mother, he said. When I was 9, I think. I was angry about something. I don't remember what. I broke something in the kitchen, a plate. Not on purpose, but I didn't move quickly enough to stop it, and it broke. He looked at his hands. My father would have responded with silence, the specific kind of silence that meant consequences. He paused. My mother sat down on the kitchen floor next to me, right on the floor, in her good clothes. And she said, "Tell me what's happening inside you right now." Not, "Tell me what you did." Inside you. Ava was very still. What did you say? I said I didn't know. His voice had changed, become quieter, reaching for something in a different register. And she said, "That's okay. We don't always have words for it at first, but we stay with it until we do." What happened to her? Ava asked softly. She died. I was 11. He said it without performance. Ovarian cancer. She was 44. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Grief doesn't have an expiration date, Ava said. He looked at her. She watched something shift in him, the tightening around his eyes that she was learning to read as emotion held at arm's length. You sound like her, he said, when you say things like that. Ava absorbed this, filed it. I think, she said carefully, that what you've just done, sitting on the floor, in the kitchen, after she died, what you did was close the door on that way of being with yourself, because the person who taught you it was gone. He didn't answer. And I think, she continued, that you've been carrying 11 years of 9-year-old grief and 46 years of everything after, and you've been carrying it in folders, cataloguing it, because your father taught you that was the only safe way, and your mother, who taught you the other way, was no longer there to remind you. The silence was very long. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I don't know where to put that. You don't have to put it anywhere right now, she said. It can just be here. He looked at her, and she saw for the first time something that cracked the surface of his composure, not through a deliberate action, but through the sheer weight of what they were holding in the room. His eyes were bright. He held it. He held it with the same control with which he held everything. But she saw it, and it changed something. Not between them, she would not call it that, would not name it with that word, but inside her understanding of him. She had been treating a man who was powerful and controlled and intelligent. She was beginning to treat a man who was grieving, who had been grieving for 27 years, who had turned the grief into architecture because no one had taught him that grief could be survived any other way. After the session, after he'd left with his jacket back on and his composure reconstructed, Ava sat for a long time. She did not write in his file. She just sat. On a Wednesday in November, 3 days before their 8th session, Marco D'Angelo called her cell phone. The number was unlisted. Very few people had it. Family, close friends, Sarah, her department head. She received the call at 8:15 in the evening, sitting in her kitchen eating leftover pho, and she saw the number she didn't recognize and almost didn't answer. Almost. Dr. Kim? His voice. She set down her chopsticks. Mr. D'Angelo. I apologize for calling. I know this is not the appropriate channel. It isn't. She kept her voice even. How did you get this number? I asked for it. From whom? A pause. That isn't something I'll be able to tell you. She absorbed this with the particular controlled quality she reserved for moments that required it. Someone in her circle had given her number to one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. She would deal with that later. Mr. D'Angelo, this call is, there's a situation. His voice was controlled, but underneath it she heard something that she'd spent weeks learning to hear. The substrate, the real temperature. My nephew, the one I told you about, he was picked up tonight, not by us, by another. There are people who are aware of my position and use people close to me to create leverage. Is he hurt? Not yet. A pause. Dr. Kim, I'm calling because I don't have anyone to tell this to. That is a sentence I never expected to be in the position of saying. He stopped. I'm sorry, this was inappropriate. Mr. D'Angelo, she spoke quietly, firmly. Don't hang up. Silence. Is he going to be hurt? No, I'm handling it. I've been handling it for the past 4 hours. He'll be home by midnight. He paused again. I called you before I called anyone else, before I called my lawyer, before I called the people handling the situation. Another pause. I don't know what to do with that. Ava looked at her kitchen, the bowl of pho cooling in front of her, the domestic stillness of the evening. It's data, she said. What do you mean? It means something that you called me. We'll talk about what it means on Thursday. She paused. Are you safe right now? Yes. Is there anything you need to do in the next 6 hours that requires a clear mind? Yes. Then let me say this and let you go. Whatever happened tonight, whatever your nephew did or didn't do, whatever choices you make in the next 6 hours, none of it makes you your father. You understand that? Silence. Do you understand that? She repeated. I'm not sure, he said. Okay,
Hold that uncertainty. Don't resolve it tonight. Thursday, we'll sit with it. A long pause, then, thank you. Go handle what needs handling, she said. Call your lawyer. Yes. And Mr. D'Angelo, don't call this number again. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. He hung up. Ava sat in her kitchen for a long time after that. The pho went cold. She didn't eat it. She thought about his voice when he'd said, I don't have anyone to tell this to. The specific texture of that sentence, the way a man of his particular construction, who had spent years building himself into a self-sufficient fortress, had found, in the middle of a crisis, that the fortress was empty. She thought about the fact that she had told him to call his lawyer professional, correct, appropriate. She thought about the fact that she had not wanted to. She washed the bowl, turned off the kitchen light, and stood at the window in the dark. He is a patient, she told herself. He is a patient, and you are his doctor, and the thing you feel right now is called countertransference, and you are going to handle it. She was very good at handling things. She was slightly less certain than she'd been an hour ago about how good she was at this particular thing. He arrived at session and said before she could speak, I owe you an apology. Sit down first, she said. He sat. You don't owe me an apology, she said. You owe yourself an honest conversation about what happened. He looked at her. The call. Yes. I put you in a position that compromised your professional situation. You did. Let's talk about why you did it. He was quiet for a moment. He'd been in session long enough now that his silences had become textured. She could read them the way she read other people's more expressive faces. This one was the silence of someone deciding how honest to be. I trusted you, he said. More than I should have. More than I meant to. Why shouldn't you? Because you are not someone I should trust. He said it without accusation. You are someone whose job it is to appear trustworthy. I know that. Is that all you think I am? He looked at her sharply. This was an unusual departure from her clinical register, and he noticed it immediately, the way he noticed everything. No, he said after a moment. Tell me what you think I am. A long pause. I think you are someone who is genuinely interested in people, in what happens inside them. He looked at the window. I think that is unusual. I think most people's interest in other people is actually interest in what those people can do for them. You are interested in the thing itself. And does that frighten you? Yes, he said immediately, and then looked slightly startled by how quickly it came out. Why? Because being genuinely seen it removes options. He looked at his hands. If you see me clearly, I cannot adjust what you see. I cannot manage the information. You like to manage information. I need to manage information. Why? Because... He stopped, started again. Because information is leverage, and leverage is safety. And if you can't leverage me? He looked at her. The look was direct, unguarded in a way she'd only seen in that session when he talked about his mother. Then I have to trust you without a mechanism, he said. That's not something I have extensive experience with. You're doing it now, she said. He sat with that. The call she said gently. You called me because you were frightened for your nephew. Yes. How often do you let yourself be frightened? Never. And last night? He was quiet. It came through, he said finally. I couldn't. The usual. It didn't work. I was frightened, and I knew I was frightened, and I couldn't put it in the folder because the folder was full of everything else, and I... He stopped. I needed to tell someone. Yes, she said, you did. That's a vulnerability. It's also what it means to be human. He looked at her for a long moment. The light in the room was the particular afternoon light of November in Chicago, low and grey and intimate. She was aware of the quality of the quiet between them, different from earlier sessions, not the quiet of two people being careful with each other, but the quiet of two people who had moved past the first layer of carefulness into something more honest and more dangerous. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want you to answer as a person, not as my doctor. She was careful. That's a complicated request. I know. I'll hear the question, she said. Do you ever... He stopped, looked at his hands. Do you find it... Do the people you treat ever... Do they become real to you? Ava was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. They do. Is that professional? It's human, she said. And human is what the work requires. He looked at her. That's a very careful answer. I gave you a careful answer because the careful answer is honest. She held his gaze steadily. My patients become real to me. Some of them become... I care about what happens to them. A pause. That's appropriate within certain boundaries. And outside those boundaries? We stay inside them, she said quietly. He looked at her for a long time. That must be difficult, he said. Yes, she said. Sometimes it is. The admission sat in the room between them like something lit. She moved them on. She had to. She was a professional, and the session was not over, and there was more work to do. But the admission sat there, long after the session ended, long after he had gone. Sarah called at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. I need to see you, she said. Not on the phone. They met at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, the kind of place that was anonymous by design. Exposed brick, deliberately bad lighting, a playlist constructed to make eavesdropping unlikely. Ava ordered a black coffee. Sarah ordered nothing and didn't take off her coat. She slid a manila folder across the table. Don't open that here, she said. Take it home. Look at it. A pause. It's the summary of the D'Angelo investigation. Not classified, not technically restricted. This level can be accessed under FOIA in about 18 months. I'm showing it to you now because I think you need to see it before then. Ava put her hand on the folder but didn't open it. What's in it? She said. Sarah looked out the window. 3 killings, directly ordered, evidence circumstantial but compelling. Labour infiltration at O'Hare. Ghost payroll at the port. We're talking 40% of the labour force, Ava, for the last 6 years. Pharmaceutical diversion. Not fentanyl, but painkillers, redirected from a licensed distributor through a shell the D'Angelos have owned since 2017. She looked back at Ava. And this is the new part. He's been identified as a target by the Bratva, the Russian outfit. They want the port operation. Is he in danger? He's always in danger. Right now,
specific danger. Sarah's voice was flat. And if you are seen with him outside a professional context, in any capacity, you become a target too. By them and by us. Officially, at that point. Understand? I'm not seen with him outside a professional context. You need to make sure that stays true. Sarah leaned forward. Ava, I am trying to protect you. You are one of the 3 people in my life I actually... She stopped. Reset. Just look at the folder. Read the summary. And tell me you still think he's just a patient you're professionally invested in. Ava picked up her coffee. I've always known what he is. Knowing abstractly and knowing concretely are different things. Sarah tapped the folder. There are photographs of the aftermath. Ava took the folder. She did not open it until that evening, sitting at her kitchen table in the late November dark, with a glass of wine she barely touched. And she read it, carefully and completely, the way she read everything. She looked at the photographs. She sat with them for a long time. Then she closed the folder. She did not sleep well. In the small hours of the morning, she lay in the dark and did the thing she almost never allowed herself to do. She stopped being a clinician and simply felt. Felt the contradiction. Felt the impossibility of the thing that was happening in her office every Thursday afternoon, the thing she had been calling countertransference risk and monitoring and filing correctly. She felt it. And she did not resolve it because it was not resolvable at 3 a.m. She thought about a man sitting on the floor of a kitchen, 9 years old, beside a broken plate. His mother beside him in her good clothes. Tell me what's happening inside you right now. She thought about what it meant that he remembered that. She thought about what it meant that she couldn't stop thinking about the fact that he remembered it. She got up at 5, made coffee, and sat at the window and watched the city come back to light. At 7, she opened her patient files. She turned to the back of Marco's folder and wrote on a clean page, Week 9 Reflection. Patient continues to exhibit significant progress in emotional differentiation and trust capacity. Initial alexithymia resolving. Patient now demonstrating in-session vulnerability with increasing frequency and decreasing resistance. Treatment is working. The question of what treatment is for, the legal strategy or the actual man, remains unresolved and is becoming less relevant to how I approach our sessions. This is a problem. This is the problem. She underlined it once, then again. Then she closed the file and called the number of her own therapist, a woman in Hyde Park she'd been seeing quarterly for 5 years, and asked for an emergency session. Not because she had done anything wrong, because she needed to understand the thing she was walking toward before she walked into it. It happened on a Tuesday in December. Ava had been to a late meeting with a colleague at the University of Chicago Medical Center and was walking to the parking structure on 57th Street, the kind of late December cold that arrived in Chicago like a physical insult, when a black sedan stopped at the curb beside her. The window lowered. Not a driver. Marco D'Angelo in the passenger seat. "Let me take you to dinner," he said. She stopped walking. The cold air moved around her. "Mr. D'Angelo, I've been sitting in this car for 20 minutes. He said it simply, without apology, without the performance of casualness. "I knew you had a meeting here tonight. I came. I'm aware that—" He looked at her steadily. I'm aware of what that is. I'm telling you anyway." She should have said no. She was aware, in complete professional clarity, that she should have said no, should have said, "This is inappropriate. We will discuss it Thursday. Good night." She was aware of every reason to say no. She had spent 11 years building the architecture of professional ethics that told her exactly how to say no. She got in the car. She did not examine why for the 2 blocks it took to reach the restaurant, a small private Italian place on the near south side, the kind that had no sign and no walk-ins and apparently no other diners on a Tuesday evening. The owner greeted Marco by name. They were seated in a back room. The room was beautiful in the way that rooms are beautiful when someone has chosen everything in them deliberately. Old wood, amber light, a fire in the hearth that was genuinely necessary against the December cold. They sat across from each other at a table that was almost too small. "This isn't a session," he said. "No," she said, "it isn't." "What is it?" She looked at him. "It's dinner." She paused. "With all the complications that implies." He looked at her, and something moved in his face, something she recognized because she'd seen it in session, that quality of contained emotion, held in check not by absence of feeling, but by the habit of restraint. "I'll take the complications," he said. They talked. Not about therapy, not about his history or his father or his grief. They talked like 2 people at a dinner. About Chicago, about the architecture of the South Side, about a documentary she'd seen the previous week on urban ecology. He had opinions. They were specific, slightly contrary, and interesting. He pushed back on 2 of her positions with an intelligence that surprised her and, she admitted to herself quietly, delighted her. He ordered for both of them without asking, which might have annoyed her, and instead, she noted this with the clinical corner of her mind that never fully went offline, didn't bother her in the slightest. He'd remembered from a sentence she'd said in session 8 weeks ago that she didn't eat shellfish. He'd remembered it, incorporated it, ordered accordingly, without comment. The food was extraordinary. After the main course, they were quiet for a moment, and he looked at her across the table with that particular look, direct, unguarded, the one she'd been seeing more often, and said, "You're not afraid of me. You've said that before. I keep finding it remarkable. Why?" He was quiet. "Because the last person who wasn't afraid of me was my mother." He said it without drama, without the performance of confession. Just a fact, handed across the table like something that had been held too long. Ava looked at him steadily. "That's a very significant thing to say." "I know." He picked up his glass. "We're not in session." "No, we're not." "Then I can say significant things without them going in a file." "They go somewhere," she said. "Everything does." He looked at her, candlelight on his face, the shadow and the warmth of it, the particular quality of his eyes in low light. She was aware of the table between them, its specific inadequacy as a boundary. "Why did you get in the car?" he asked. She considered lying. She was a person who was very good at restraint, and lying was one form of restraint, and she considered it. "I don't know," she said. "That's the honest answer." "I'll take that too," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "What are we doing?" "Having dinner." Marco, his given name. She heard herself say it, and something shifted subtly between them.
He looked at her when she used his name. The quality of his attention intensified. "Ava," he said. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. "I need you to understand something," she said finally. "Whatever this is, whatever's happening, there are things I cannot do. Not because I don't—" She stopped, started again. "There are ethical obligations that I will not set aside. I have a responsibility to you as a patient that exists regardless of—" "I know," he said. "Do you?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to set them aside." A pause. "I'm asking for dinner." She looked at him across the small table in the amber light with the fire making the room warm against the December cold. "Okay," she said. They had dessert. A panna cotta, fresh figs, a small glass of passita. They talked about books. He read, which surprised her, and then, upon reflection, didn't. He had an unexpectedly precise memory for passages he'd read and hadn't understood. He read for understanding, the way she did, working at things until they opened. He drove her to her building. His driver pulled to the curb, and Marco got out, walked her to the lobby door, not in the ornate manner of performance, but simply there, present. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he agreed. She went inside. She did not look back. She was very aware of not looking back. Thursday came with the specific weight of inevitability. He sat down, and she sat down, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The session had been preceded by something. Tuesday had changed the gravity of the room. She could feel it. He could feel it. They were two intelligent people who did not pretend not to notice things. "We should talk about Tuesday," she said. "Yes." He settled into the chair. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. Assess." This was a clinical intervention she used when apology was a deflection. "What happened, from your perspective?" "I put you in a professionally compromised position. And from your perspective, the internal perspective, what happened?" He looked at her directly. "I wanted to see you, outside of here. I acted on it." He paused. "I'm not sorry for wanting it. I'm sorry for the complication it creates for you." "Those are two different things," she observed. "Yes." "The want. When did that become clear to you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Second session," he said. "When you apologized. When you were wrong about something and you just acknowledged it and moved on. You didn't hedge. You didn't perform." He looked at his hands. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who can't be wrong, can't be seen to be wrong. And you sat there and said, 'Fair point, I apologize,' and went on with the session." He looked up. "I didn't know what to do with that." Ava kept her expression clinical. It required effort. "And the dinner?" "The dinner was—" He looked away. "The dinner was the first time in an extremely long time that I have wanted time to keep going. That I have been somewhere and not been managing the situation, not calculating, just—" He paused. "Present." She wrote something. She wasn't sure it was clinical. "I need to be honest with you about something," she said. He waited. "What happened Tuesday complicates our therapeutic relationship." She chose her words with care. "Not irreparably, but it needs to be acknowledged, and we need to make a decision about how to proceed." "What decision?" "The decision about whether to continue treatment." He was very still. You would stop seeing me. If we cannot maintain the appropriate framework, then for your benefit and for mine, yes. I would refer you to a colleague. Something moved across his face. Not his controlled surface. Underneath that. That's not. He stopped. Say the rest, she said. That's not what I want. He looked at her directly. I'm aware that what I want isn't the determining factor. I'm saying it anyway. What do you want? I want to continue treatment. He held her gaze. I want to continue dinner. I understand that those two things cannot coexist in any straightforward way. He paused. I am willing to be patient. Marco? She used his name deliberately as a marker of the register she was choosing. I cannot see you socially while you are my patient. That's not a preference, it's not a scruple. It's a structural requirement of the therapeutic relationship. If I compromise that, I compromise everything we've done in this room. I know. Do you understand why? Because you need to be outside the dynamic. Because if you're part of my life, you can't also be the person who sees me clearly from outside it. He said it precisely, the way he'd articulated his emotional patterns, with the intelligence of a man who had listened carefully and thought carefully about what he'd heard. I understand the structure. I understand why it has to hold. Yes, she said. A long silence. Then we continue treatment, he said. And I stop. I stop doing things I shouldn't do. Yes. I'll be honest. I'm not sure I can stop, he paused. I can stop the behaviour. The underlying thing is not something I can turn off. She looked at him steadily. I know, she said. That's not what I'm asking. He looked at her. Something raw and present in his face, unguarded in a way that she'd come to recognise as his version of openness. The expression of a man who had never learned the usual masks, and was therefore sometimes more visible than he intended. How long, he said. Not a question, exactly. More like a measurement. How long until you're no longer my patient? Yes. She looked at him carefully. The legal strategy. How long does it need to run? The indictment timeline? Hargrove believes the grand jury convenes in March. A formal treatment relationship lasting 6 months would be... He stopped, looked at her. I'm using legal strategy as a timeline for something else. I notice that. That's significant, she said. Yes, he looked almost wry. I notice a lot of things in here that I don't particularly enjoy noticing. That's what treatment is. Yes. He was quiet. 6 months, he said. February, March. Whatever happens in the grand jury happens in March. Then we work, she said. We do the work that needs doing. Whatever is underneath the work is something that can be addressed at the appropriate time. She held his gaze. That's the boundary. It has to hold. He looked at her for a long time. It will hold, he said. She believed him. She also believed the thing underneath it, the thing they were both managing, both holding at a distance, with the discipline of two very self-possessed people who understood the stakes, would become harder to hold with every week that passed. She was right about that. 2 weeks before Christmas, Carlo appeared in her office doorway again. This time, Priya had actually let him through, whether through improved judgment or because he had charmed her in the waiting room, Ava didn't inquire. He set a box on her desk again, smaller this time.
Mr. D'Angelo asked me to bring this, he said. He said to tell you it's not a gift, it's information. Ava looked at the box. It was a velvet jeweller's case, which was an unusual package for information. She opened it. Inside was a small note, folded on the same cream stationery. Under the note was a USB drive. She read the note. There are people who have been watching you, not ours, unrelated to the grand jury. The drive contains what my people have found. You should know. I'm sorry you're caught in this. M. Ava set the note down carefully. He wanted me to know, she said, more to herself than to Carlo. Yes, ma'am. She plugged in the drive that evening, at home, with her apartment locked and her phone off. The drive contained surveillance photographs of her walking to work, leaving the building, at the farmer's market, 4 different days over 6 weeks. The photographs were taken from positions she had to look for, and she was good at noticing things, and she hadn't noticed. There was a second folder on the drive, a name and a brief dossier. Alexei Volkov, Chicago representative, Bratva affiliate. Sarah had mentioned the Bratva. She'd mentioned they were targeting D'Angelo. They were using her to get to him. She sat for a long time in her quiet apartment, in the winter dark, with the USB drive on the table in front of her, and the particular quality of stillness that arrived when everything changed. She called Sarah. You knew, Ava said, when Sarah answered. A pause. We suspected. When were you going to tell me? When we had actionable, when were you going to tell me, Sarah? A longer pause. Soon, we were building a case. We needed... You needed me in place. The realization landed clearly. Without anger, she was past anger, in the specific cold place beyond it. I was useful to you where I was, in contact with D'Angelo, potentially as a conduit, or at minimum as an observer. You needed me staying in position. Sarah said nothing. I am not an asset, Ava said. I am a psychiatrist, and my patient's information is not available to the Bureau, and I am not going to be managed. Ava, I'm going to need you to be straight with me from this point forward, completely, or I contact my attorney and everything becomes formal and extremely unpleasant for everyone. She paused. Do you understand? Yes, Sarah said. Is there anything else you haven't told me? A pause. We think Volkov knows your schedule. He's been photographing the Marquette building. He may try to use you to get to D'Angelo more directly. Ava absorbed this. More directly, meaning as leverage. The word was flat, clinical. You'd be a message. The room was very quiet. I need a week to think, Ava said. Ava, a week, Sarah. She hung up. She looked at the USB drive on the table. She thought about what it meant that Marco had found out before the FBI told her. She thought about what it meant that he'd told her immediately. She thought about the note. I'm sorry you're caught in this. And the specificity of it. The recognition that she hadn't chosen to be here. That she had been brought into something by proximity and the particular gravity of the choices she'd made in the past 2 months. She called her attorney at 10 o'clock at night. He was not pleased. He was, however, extremely competent. She did not call Marco. She thought about calling him. She did not.
The following Thursday, she told him. Not everything, not the FBI conversation, not the full extent of what Sarah had disclosed, but the photographs. The name. The drive. He was very still when she finished. Very still in the way that she had come to understand was not calm, but contained. The stillness of something under pressure. "Who gave you the drive?" he said. "Carlo." "I know Carlo gave it. Who told Carlo?" "You, I assumed." He looked at her. "I gave instructions for the information to be provided to you. I did not know the extent of what my security team had documented." He paused. "I will need to address that with them. Marco." She kept her voice even. "I need you to hear this. Whatever your security team does on your behalf, I am not under your protection. I am not an extension of your operation. You're in danger because of me. I'm in danger because of a geopolitical dispute between organized crime factions," she said. "That's a distinction I'm maintaining. It's a meaningless distinction. It's not." She looked at him steadily. "If I become something you protect, I stop being your therapist. Those roles are incompatible. Your safety is my responsibility." She held his gaze. "I have spoken to my attorney. I have spoken to the relevant authorities. I am taking steps that are appropriate and within my control. What I need from you is to work within our sessions and not to take unilateral action on my behalf." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, which happened less frequently now, but still happened, a frustration to her. "You're asking me not to do the thing that is most natural to me," he said. "Yes. And if something happens to you because Marco," he stopped. "This is the moment," she said, "where you do the thing that's hard. Where you hold the discomfort of not controlling the outcome. Where you trust that I can handle my own situation." She looked at him with complete steadiness. "Can you do that?" A long silence. "I don't know," he said. "That's honest. I don't like it. I know." He looked at her. The controlled surface was thinner today than it had ever been. She could see through it to something that was working very hard underneath. The particular effort of a man trying to override a deeply ingrained response pattern because he had, slowly, over the course of 4 months, come to believe that the work required it. "Okay," he said. "I won't act unilaterally." She looked at him carefully. She knew how much that cost. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me." His voice was quiet. "I'm going to find it extremely difficult." "I know. That's why it matters." He looked at her for a long time. The afternoon light was dim today, cloud cover heavy over the city. The room felt enclosed. She was aware of the distance between them, the appropriate professional distance she maintained by habit and intention, and she was aware of it more acutely than usual, which told her something about the particular quality of this moment. "How much longer?" he asked. She knew what he was asking. "February," she said. "Hargrove submitted the treatment record to the Grand Jury Council last week. They've accepted it. The legal function of our therapeutic relationship is essentially complete." "So you'd be free of the professional obligation after a 60-day cooling period?" She paused. "Standard practice." He was very still. "April," he said. "April," she confirmed. He looked at her for a long moment, and in his face she saw the thing she had been watching develop for 4 months, the thing that was underneath the control and the grief and the fortress he'd built around himself. She saw it clearly. She looked back at it without flinching. "Then I'll wait until April," he said. January in Chicago was its own kind of character, brutal and bright and completely indifferent to human preference. The lake threw snow sideways, the city hunched into itself. In the compressed darkness of the season, Ava found that her sessions with Marco had taken on a new quality. Something had resolved in December. The confrontation, the acknowledgement, the explicit naming of the thing that was between them had the paradoxical effect of making the sessions cleaner, less charged in the lateral, unspoken way they'd been charged, more honest. He talked about his business for the first time in any substantive way, not the operational details she couldn't have heard without complication, but the architecture of his relationship to it. The way he'd inherited not just a business, but an identity. The way Carmine D'Angelo had built the family's power and his son's psychology simultaneously, so that they were, for Marco, essentially the same thing. "I don't know who I am outside of this," he said in the 11th session. That's the first time I've said that out loud. How does it feel to say it?" "Destabilizing." He looked at her. "And accurate." That combination, destabilizing and accurate, is almost the definition of productive therapy. "I've started to enjoy this," he said, with a faint incredulity. "That seems wrong." "Why?" "Because it hurts." "Things can hurt and be enjoyed," she said. "Growth often does." She paused. "You've been afraid of feeling things for a long time. The fact that you can sit with difficult feelings and find them even marginally worthwhile is a significant change." He looked at the window. January snow, the city grey and white beyond the glass. "My nephew came to dinner last week," he said. "Luca's boy." "How was it?" "I explained things to him." A pause. Not everything. Not the things he can't know. But I explained my reasoning. I told him why the distance I keep him at is protective rather than dismissive." He paused. "It was uncomfortable." "Why?" "Because vulnerability is uncomfortable." "And yet you did it." "Yes." "How did he respond?" Marco was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that she'd never seen there before. Something warm. He said... He stopped. He said he appreciated it. He said he'd wondered if I... Another pause. He said he'd wondered if I actually saw him. "Do you?" "I do now." He looked at her. "I'm starting to see people. It's disorienting." "It's what your mother was trying to teach you," Ava said quietly. "When you were 9. He looked at her, that brightness she'd seen once before in session 7. He held it together this time, but it was present, the emotion at the surface rather than in the folder. "Yes," he said. "I think it is." She let the session settle around that for a moment before moving forward. In the second week of January, she was leaving the Marquette building at 7 in the evening when she saw the man. He was standing across the street, not quite in the shadow of the parking structure entrance, wearing a coat that was too light for the weather.
He had the particular stillness of someone surveilling, different from the stillness of someone waiting or someone cold. The stillness of professional attention. She knew, looking at him, that this was the Bratva situation coming to something. She walked to her car with her phone in her hand, her keys accessible, going through the threat response protocol that Sarah's people had walked her through in December. The man didn't follow, but when she got home, there was a message on her building's intercom. No name, just a number, handwritten, slid under the concierge's desk. She had the concierge dispose of it and called Sarah from her apartment. Escalating, Sarah confirmed. We're close to making a move. I need a week. I've been told I need a week before, Ava said. This time I mean it. Ava called Marco. She should not have. She did. I need you to know something, she said. The situation with Volkov. I know, he said. You know. I've known for 4 days. My people… He stopped. I told you I wouldn't act unilaterally. I've been not acting unilaterally for 4 days, and it's been… A pause. Dr. Kim? Don't, she said. I need to… Marco, I need you to tell me you will not do anything. Silence. Please, she said. A very long silence. I will not do anything that hasn't already been arranged, he said. That's the best I can do, he said quietly. That's the honest answer. She stood at her window in the January dark and looked at the city and thought about what it meant to be protected by someone you couldn't let protect you. Be careful, she said. Always, he said. She hung up. She stood at the window for a very long time. It happened on a Tuesday. Not during a session, not a call, not a dinner. A Tuesday afternoon in late January, when Ava was leaving the Marquette building at 5:30, and the black car was parked at the wrong curb, and the man who got out was not Carlo. She recognized him from the photographs on the drive, Volkov's associate. She knew his name, Dmitri. She knew his history, summarized in 3 brief paragraphs. Georgian by birth, Chicago since 2019, 2 priors that hadn't stuck, current occupation listed as import/export, with the specific irony that phrase carried. He walked toward her on the sidewalk. He was not hurrying. Unhurriedness was a specific kind of threat. She stopped walking. Dr. Kim, he said. His accent was light, practiced. Mr. Volkov would like to speak with you. I don't know a Mr. Volkov, she said. You know of him. He smiled. It was not a friendly expression. Ava's phone was in her hand. She pressed the emergency contact she'd set up in December, a single click, soundless, that sent a signal to both Sarah's team and, she now admitted honestly to herself, the number she'd stored in her recent contacts. I'm a private citizen, she said, keeping her voice even. I'm walking to my car. If Mr. Volkov has a concern about me, I suggest he contact my attorney. Mr. Volkov's concern is not with you, Dmitri said. It's with a mutual acquaintance. He reached into his coat pocket. I'm going to stop you there, said a voice behind Ava. She turned halfway, keeping Dmitri in her peripheral vision. Carlo was behind her, and beside Carlo, another man. Both of them very still, very present, in the particular way that men were present when they were ready. Dmitri looked at them. Something recalculated behind his eyes. Another time, he said.
and returned to the black car. It pulled away. Ava stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The January wind moved around her. She was breathing carefully, measuring it. The clinical corner of her mind, noting that her heart rate was elevated, and she was in the mild physiological state of someone who had been frightened and who was managing the aftermath of that. "He knew you were going to say you wouldn't act unilaterally," she said to Carlo. Carlo looked at her. "I don't know what you mean, ma'am." "Carlo?" He looked almost apologetic. It was the first time she'd seen him look almost anything. "Mr. D'Angelo was very specific," Carlo said. "He said he wouldn't do anything himself. He said—" Carlo paused, and in his face she saw the very slight evidence of someone suppressing a smile. "He said he had made a commitment to Dr. Kim, and he intended to keep it, but that he was free to make other arrangements." Ava looked at the empty street where the black car had been. She thought about the commitment she'd extracted from him and the precise way he'd kept it, technically, creatively, with the particular intelligence of a man who understood exactly where the boundary was and had found the adjacent thing. She was annoyed. She was also, with a clarity that she was past pretending wasn't there, profoundly relieved. She called Sarah. Sarah, when she arrived 15 minutes later with 2 colleagues, was extremely not pleased to find that the situation had been resolved by private means. "He was going to grab you," Sarah said. "Leverage. We were ready to move." "You were a minute away," Ava said. "His people were 2 minutes earlier." Sarah looked at her. "How does he have access to your emergency contact?" Ava looked at her steadily. "He doesn't." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. "Right," she said. They understood each other. Marco called at 10 that night. "Are you all right?" His voice, the substrate, the temperature underneath the control, was different. Thin in a way she hadn't heard before. "I'm fine," she said. "A little shaken." "I'm sorry." "Don't." "Ava, Marco." She sat in the dark of her apartment, her knees drawn up, the lamp making a warm circle. "I am fine. It didn't escalate. I'm fine." She paused. "I am aware that you technically kept your promise." A brief silence, something that might, on someone with a different relationship to humour, have been laughter. "Technically?" "You are an extremely precise person," she said. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It was meant as one." She was quiet for a moment. "The situation with Volkov is being handled. Sarah's team moved on him tonight." A pause. "It's over." "Good." His voice was still thin, still carrying that quality she was hearing for the first time. "Marco," she said softly, "are you all right?" A pause. A long one. "No," he said. "Not tonight." She heard that. She held it. "Tell me," she said. And he did. For 40 minutes he talked, not with the careful, managed quality of session, not with the folder and catalogue approach he'd brought in September. He talked the way his mother had asked him to when he was 9, about what was happening inside him, about what it had felt like to hear Carlo's report about Dmitri, about the 4 hours between that report and knowing she was safe, about sitting in his penthouse with a glass of scotch he didn't drink, looking at the city
and understanding, with complete clarity, that there was a specific person on this earth whose safety he was unable to contemplate in the abstract. When he finished, they were quiet together for a moment. "I know," she said. "What do you know?" "I know," she said. "Me too." Silence. "February," he said. "February," she said. February arrived the way February arrived in Chicago, with the grudging acknowledgement that winter had not finished, but was at least no longer escalating. The lake ice began to fracture at the edges. The sky, on certain days, showed a colour that was almost blue. The last session was on a Thursday. Not the last ever session. They had discussed this, the clinical process for termination, the importance of ending deliberately rather than simply stopping. They had agreed to 3 closing sessions. This was the third. Marco sat in the chair and looked at her and said, "I don't know how to do this." "You've done harder things," she said. "This is specifically hard," he said. "Because I know it's the last time I'm sitting here in this context, and I'm aware that changes what comes next. And what comes next—" He stopped, looked at his hands. "I've been afraid of what comes next for longer than I understood, until I was sitting across from you. Tell me what you mean." "This room," he gestured briefly. "This room has been—" He was quiet. "Safe," he said. "That's the word. This has been safe. You have been—" He looked at her directly. "You have seen me more completely than anyone since my mother, and I'm terrified that when the framework changes, when it's not—" He stopped. "When there's no structure holding it in place, that you'll what?" "That I'll default." He held her gaze. "That I'll go back into the fortress, that I'll—" A pause. "That I'll do to you what I did to every other person I've—" "Marco." She leaned forward slightly. "You are not who you were in September." "I know." "Do you believe that?" A long pause. "Yes," he said. "That's what's frightening. I believe it." He looked at her. "Because if I didn't believe it, I could protect myself. If I thought I was still exactly the person I was, I could assume I was going to damage everything and act accordingly. But I believe I've changed, and that means I have to—" He looked at her. "I have to try. And trying means I might fail." "Yes," she said. "It does." "That's terrifying." "Yes," she said. "It is." They were quiet. "What has changed?" she asked. "In your own words, not what you think I want to hear." He thought for a moment. "I feel things, and I don't immediately put them in a folder," he said. "I see people, my nephew, Luca, my team. I see them instead of managing them." A pause. "I can sit with not knowing an outcome without needing to control the information." He paused again. "I miss my mother in a way that I can actually feel rather than just categorizing as relevant historical data." She was very still. "I want things," he continued, and his voice was different on this, quieter, more careful. "Specific things. I want a particular quality of conversation. I want the kind of silence that isn't absence of noise, but presence of ease." He looked at her. "I want not to be the most controlled person in every room I walk into." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's profound progress," she said. "That last one especially." "I've been practicing," he said. "In here." "I know." They sat with the session for a few more minutes, the clinical space of closing, the deliberate marking of completion.
She asked him how he felt about what they'd done. He said, with the particular economy that was his version of directness, that he thought it had been the most important thing he'd done in his adult life. She asked what he'd take out of the room. He thought about it. The ability to say, "I don't know," he said. That's the one. I spent 40 years treating "I don't know" as a failure state. Now I understand. It's a starting point. She looked at him. That's a good answer. I had a good teacher, he said. She smiled. She let herself smile. Not the professional smile, the real one, the one she gave to people she genuinely liked and respected. He looked at it the way he'd been looking at things lately, the particular quality of attention that was no longer just assessment. How long? He said at the end. 60 days, she said. Standard. I know the standard protocol. He looked at her. March and April. I'll wait. You've said that before. I meant it then, he said. I mean it more now. He stood, picked up his jacket, looked at her for a long moment. You changed something, he said. I want you to know that. So did you, she said. He looked at her carefully, as if committing something to memory. Not notes this time, something else. Then he left. Ava sat alone in her office in the February afternoon. She looked at the chair he'd been sitting in since September. She looked at her legal pad, full now. She'd gone through 6 legal pads on his case, which was more than any patient she'd treated in 3 years. She looked at what she'd written on the last page of the last pad. She had written 1 sentence at the end of the previous session and not shown it to him. He is a man who is learning how to love without armour, and I am the person who taught him that, and I am in love with him, and I have been for a very long time. She didn't underline it. It didn't need underlining. She closed the pad and put it in the file. March and April. The 2 months were the longest of Ava Kim's professional life, and she documented this with clinical precision, not because it was useful clinically, but because it was useful to her to have her own experience witnessed somewhere, even just by her own handwriting. She saw her therapist in Hyde Park twice in March and 3 times in April. She worked. She took on 2 new patients and returned calls she'd been deferring. She went to the farmers' market and the Art Institute and a reading at the Poetry Foundation, where she sat in the 3rd row and felt, in the particular way that poems sometimes arrived, a line that seemed to be addressed specifically to her. What you name, you can no longer be afraid of. She named it. She'd been naming it since the last session. She was afraid of it the way you were afraid of a drop from a great height, not because you believed you were going to fall, but because the height was real. Marco D'Angelo did not contact her. This was, she acknowledged, exactly what she'd asked for. The discipline of it. She understood the discipline, felt it, because she exercised the same discipline herself, sitting with her phone in her hand on more than one evening and choosing not to call. Sarah called in early March to tell her that Alexei Volkov had been charged in federal court with attempted extortion and 2 related charges. The case against D'Angelo had shifted. The grand jury had been postponed while the Bureau restructured its approach. Hargrove had submitted the psychiatric treatment record. The indictment, if it came, would come later and differently. He played this very well, Sarah said without heat. The therapy, the record, it changes the optics. I know, Ava said. And you're okay with that? Being used? Ava thought about it, honestly.
The legal strategy was real, she said, but so was the treatment. Both can be true. Sarah was quiet. Is he still your patient? No, Ava said. He hasn't been my patient since February. And is he, Sarah? Just asking. I know you are. Sarah said carefully, be careful. You've said that before. I'll keep saying it. I know, Ava said. Thank you. She bought a dress in April. She was not a woman who bought things in anticipation of events. She was practical, organised, accustomed to addressing situations as they arrived, rather than preparing for them emotionally. But she bought a dress. Deep green, silk, simple in the specific way that required enormous precision. She hung it in her closet and looked at it occasionally and thought about what it meant that she'd bought it. It meant April was coming. It meant she was no longer treating the thing in her chest as a clinical notation to be managed. It meant she had made a decision, quietly, without fanfare, in the way she made most important decisions, by simply understanding herself clearly enough to know what was true. On the last Tuesday of April, 62 days after the final session, 2 days past the technical end of the waiting period, which she was counting with the particular precision of someone who had been very disciplined for a very long time, she called his number. He picked up on the first ring. I know, he said. She smiled. She was standing in her kitchen, the window full of late April sun, the dahlias she'd gotten at the market the week before, brilliant on the sill. You knew I was going to call. I've been waiting, he said. Not patiently. You've been patient. By the skin of my teeth. His voice was different, warmer, or more accurately, the warmth that had always been underneath was less defended. It came through. Are you well? Yes, she said. You? Better than I've been in a long time. A pause. Will you have dinner with me? Yes, she said. Tonight. Tonight, she agreed. She heard something in his voice then, brief, quiet, something she'd never heard from him before. The exhale of a man who had been holding his breath for months. He picked her up himself. No Carlo, no driver. Marco. In a car she'd never seen, something low and dark and Italian, parked at her curb when she came down at 7. She was wearing the green dress. He got out of the car when he saw her. He stood by the door and looked at her for a moment in the way she'd last seen him look at her across the Art Institute gallery, that fixed, certain quality of attention. Then he walked to meet her on the sidewalk. You wore green, he said. You noticed. I notice everything about you, he said. You know that. She looked up at him in the late April evening, the city going soft around them, the air carrying the specific promise of Chicago in the weeks when winter is finally over, and she felt something open in her, the way a room opens when you have been in it alone for a long time and someone finally arrives. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere that isn't our room, he said. Somewhere that isn't a gallery event or a crisis or a Tuesday that happened because I couldn't help myself. He looked at her. Somewhere that's just... Dinner, she said. Dinner, he agreed. As 2 people. 2 people, she said, and got into the car. He took her to a restaurant on the lake, one of his, technically, though he didn't say so and she didn't ask. A beautiful room with windows on the water, the April lake steel blue and enormous. They sat at a window table, and the city was visible at the periphery of all that water.
And it was the particular combination of private and vast that felt exactly right. They talked. Easily, in the way that was new in this context, without the structure of the therapeutic frame, without the careful management of what could and couldn't be said. He talked about a trip he was planning, something vague and European. She talked about a paper she was writing, a conference in October. He asked questions that were good questions, specific and attentive, the questions of someone who had been listening to her for months and retained everything. Halfway through dinner, he said, "I want to say something." "Say it." "I was afraid of you," he said, "from the beginning. Not in the way I told you, not the being seen version, though that was true. Afraid in the basic way." He looked at her. "In the way I told you I hadn't been afraid of anything for a long time." She looked at him steadily. "You made me want to be a different person," he said. "Not to become someone else, not to leave behind what I am, but to expand it, to be able to hold more than I was holding." He paused. "I have never wanted that before. I've wanted outcomes, resources, solutions. I've never wanted to simply be larger." "And now?" she asked. "And now," he said, "I think I know what my mother was teaching me on the kitchen floor." She felt something move in her that she let move, didn't catalogue, didn't file, didn't hold at distance, just felt. "What was she teaching you?" Ava asked. He looked at her across the table, with the April lake behind him, and his face open, in the way it only opened now, the way she'd spent months helping him open it. "That you stay with it," he said. "You stay with the thing inside you until it has words, and then you give it words." "And do you have words?" she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm working on them," he said, with a faint quality that was the closest thing to shyness she'd ever seen in him. "I have the feeling before the words, the way I always do, but I'm working on it." She smiled, the real smile, the one she'd given him in the last session and which he'd looked at like he was memorizing it. "That's good progress," she said softly. "I had a good teacher," he said again, and this time the way he said it carried everything. Everything the session context had made him hold, everything the months of discipline and distance had meant, everything the folder had contained while the sessions ran their necessary course. She reached across the table. Her hand covered his. He looked down at their hands on the white tablecloth, and then he looked up at her, and whatever she had been calling the thing in his eyes, the brightness she'd seen in Session 7, the warmth she'd heard in February, the temperature underneath the control, all of it was present and accounted for. "Ava," he said. "Yes," she said, even though he hadn't asked anything yet. His hand turned under hers and held it. Outside, the lake was dark and enormous. The city glittered at its margins. Inside, in the amber light of a window table in April, two people sat across from each other, with their hands joined on the table, and everything that had been held at distance now present in the room. And it was not carefully managed, and it was not filed under anything. It was simply there. There is no version of this story that is clean. That is the truth of it, the central truth, the thing that Ava Kim, who had always been rigorous about truth, sat with on a morning in May in Marco D'Angelo's penthouse apartment, in his kitchen, in the early sun, with coffee she had made herself because she had woken first and he was still asleep. And the truth was this: there was no clean version.
He was who he was. She was who she was. Between them lay 11 years of her professional life and a therapeutic relationship that had walked the edge of everything it was supposed to be without quite crossing it, and then crossed it deliberately and consciously on the last Tuesday of April. And the world had not ended, and ethics were real and complicated. And she had already spoken to the relevant licensing body about the case timeline and the disclosure protocol, and had received, after 6 weeks, a determination that the 60-day cooling period and the proper termination process had been observed, and the relationship was in compliance. The world had not ended. Outside, Chicago was spring, genuinely spring, the sudden, impossible spring of the upper Midwest that arrived like an apology for everything winter had done, all green and light, and the lake going blue in a way it only went in May. From the penthouse windows, which ran floor to ceiling on the south and east walls, you could see the city spread below and the lake beyond it, enormous and present, and the sky above both doing something complicated with light. She heard him before she saw him, the particular sound of his movement which she was learning, the economy of it, the contained quality even half awake. He came into the kitchen and looked at her. She had his coffee ready. She set it on the counter. He picked it up without looking at it because he was looking at her, with that quality of attention she had once catalogued under threat assessment and now understood differently. Not threat assessment, the opposite. The way a man looked at something he was afraid of losing. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He leaned against the counter. He was still the most contained person in any room, still the man who could make a kitchen feel like a study in gravitational force, still the person whose presence recalibrated the space around him. But he was also, and she watched this, she had been watching it since February, less defended at the edges. There were places where the architecture had softened, not collapsed, not broken, but changed, the way a fortress could change when someone had been living in it rather than just fortifying it. "You were up early," he said. "I wanted to see the light on the lake," she said. He turned to look at the window. The lake this morning was something incandescent. "Yes," he said, "it does that." "Do you see it?" she asked, "or do you just know it does that?" He looked at her. The smile, his smile, the real one, which was small and asymmetric and more than made up for its restraint with its honesty. "Both," he said. "I'm working on being in the both at the same time." "That's good progress," she said, for what felt like the 100th time, and his smile widened. "You're not my therapist," he said. "Old habits," she said. He moved from the counter to the window and stood with his coffee looking out at the city. She came to stand beside him, not because the view required it, but because that was where she wanted to be. He didn't look at her. He looked at the city, but his arm moved, and his hand found the small of her back and rested there, warm and certain, with the same quality his handshake had carried in the first session, the quality she'd catalogued then as nothing to prove, and understood now as something deeper than that. Certainty. The particular certainty of a man who had, at considerable difficulty and over considerable time, figured out what he wanted and was not in any confusion about it. "Hargrove called yesterday," he said. "I know," she'd heard from her attorney. "The grand jury. They're moving in June." He was quiet. "We don't know the shape of it yet." "Are you afraid?" He was quiet for a moment. The question, a year ago, he would have answered immediately with no, reflexively and without examination, in the way that no was the answer before you'd decided whether to feel the question. He was quiet now, and she watched him examine the question honestly, and then he said, "Yes, some." "Tell me what about?" "Not the legal outcome. Hargrove has—" He paused. "Not the legal outcome." He turned to look at her. "What I'm afraid of is the attention, the exposure, the fact that when it becomes public, everything that is this." He gestured briefly, the gesture encompassing the kitchen, the morning, both of them. "Becomes part of a narrative I don't control." "I'm part of your record," she said. "The treatment record." "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "I need you to know that I understand what I'm asking by keeping you here. In my life, in proximity to Marco." He stopped. "I'm a grown person," she said. "I have a lawyer. I have a federal agent who is my friend and who has already pulled my file and reviewed my conduct and found it impeccable, and who called me in March with the specific air of someone deciding to stand down." She paused. "I'm not in proximity to your situation. I'm in proximity to you. Those are different things." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face that she was learning to read as gratitude, though he'd been slow to find the word for it. "You're not afraid of me," he said, for the third time in their acquaintance. "No," she said, "I know you." "You know the interior," he said. "The rest of it." "The rest of it is who you've been. The interior is who you are." She looked at him steadily. "I'm interested in who you are." He was quiet for a moment. The city below them, the lake, the May morning, all of it going on in its particular indifferent magnificence. "I love you," he said. He said it the way he'd said "I don't know" in the early sessions, simply, without scaffolding, just the words and the acknowledgement of them. The words he'd been working toward, the thing he'd told her he had before the words came. She looked at him in the May morning light, this man she'd spent a year understanding, this man who had come to her as a strategy and become something else entirely, who had cracked open under the particular pressure of genuine attention and revealed something she hadn't expected, hadn't been trained for, hadn't filed away. Something that had been real since approximately the second session and had been managed with extraordinary professionalism and enormous difficulty until it couldn't be managed any more. "I know," she said. "That's not—" He tilted his head. "That's not the reciprocation. I love you too," she said. "I've been in love with you since the session where you told me about the kitchen floor and your mother. And I have been very professional about it for a very long time." He looked at her. The quality of his attention, which she had been cataloguing since September, which she had watched change and deepen and open, was now something she didn't have clinical language for, and was glad she didn't, because clinical language was not the right language here. "You were very professional," he said. "I was exceptional," she agreed. "You were," he said. "I was—" He was quiet for a moment. "I was aware. I have been aware since approximately the first session. You said something in the first session that—" "What did I say?" He looked at her. "You said, 'I wait.'" She looked at him. "When I asked what you did when you were right," he said, "you said, 'I wait.' And I—" He looked out at the lake for a moment. I had never met anyone who waited.
Everyone I know acts, reacts, manages. You waited, and I thought... He paused. I thought that was the most powerful thing I'd ever encountered. She was quiet for a moment. You've been thinking about that since September, she said. Since September, he confirmed. She looked at him, the light on his face, the morning, the city below, the lake enormous beyond all of it. The specific quality of a life at a turning point, which you could only recognize while it was happening if you paid attention. She paid attention. What do we do with it? She asked. He turned from the window and faced her fully. His hand moved from the small of her back, and both hands held her face, and he looked at her for a moment in a way that was, she thought, with the last clinical corner of her mind, and then that corner went quiet too, the way a man looked when he was finally, for the first time, present in his own life. We stay with it, he said, until we have words. She looked up at him. We have words, she said. We have more, he said. We're just starting. He kissed her then, in his kitchen in the May morning, with the lake out the window and the city going on below them in its particular irreverent way, and she felt the thing she'd been cataloguing and managing and holding at appropriate professional distance for nearly a year simply become itself, become real, become, as he had said, something they would stay with. There is no version of this story that is clean, but standing in the window light with the lake going silver in the May sun and Marco D'Angelo's hands on her face and 11 months of careful, disciplined, occasionally heartbreaking work behind them both, Ava Kim was not looking for clean. She was looking at the thing itself. She was looking at it, and it was extraordinary. Somewhere in an office on the 14th floor of the Dirksen Federal Building, a case file with Marco D'Angelo's name was being reviewed by a federal prosecutor who was considering carefully how to proceed with evidence that was compelling but not yet sufficient, and a subject who had, in the past year, acquired a psychiatrist's clean bill of mental engagement and a profile that was difficult to render unsympathetically. Somewhere on the south side, Luca D'Angelo's youngest son was taking a business class at DePaul, paid for by his uncle without condition or expectation, and learning for the first time that understanding a thing was different from executing it. Somewhere in the city, Sarah Chen was sitting at her desk at 11 in the morning, looking at a photograph on her screen. Marco D'Angelo and Ava Kim, taken by a surveillance camera outside a restaurant on the lake, his hand at the small of her back, her face turned toward him in the evening light. And she was looking at her friend's expression in that photograph with the specific feeling of someone who had lost an argument she'd cared about and found herself unable entirely to wish she'd won it. She closed the file. She opened a new one. The city continued. The lake continued. Chicago went on in its perpetual way, indifferent and magnificent, and full of people living between the worlds they came from and the worlds they were building, carrying their histories forward into whatever came next. Ava Kim stood in a penthouse kitchen in May and held the present without filing it. Marco D'Angelo looked at the woman across from him and did not calculate the outcome. They stayed with it until they had words, and then, after the words, which were simple, which were real, which were the kind of words his mother had told him to look for on a kitchen floor in a different life, they had more. They were just starting.
6 months later, in October, Ava Kim presented a paper at a psychiatric conference in Boston on the therapeutic dynamics of resistant patients and the clinical ethics of managing countertransference in high-stakes cases. The paper was published the following spring in the American Journal of Psychiatry and cited 42 times in its first year.
She did not identify her case study. She did not need to. The case study was the best part of the paper, rich, specific, honest about the difficulties and the near failures and the discipline required to maintain professional integrity in conditions that made integrity genuinely hard. The reviewers called it unusually candid. One called it the most human psychiatric case study this reviewer has encountered in 15 years of practice. She accepted the compliment. In a penthouse apartment on the lake, on the evening the paper was accepted, Marco D'Angelo read it twice. He knew which case study was his. He sat with the knowledge of being written about, with that quality of honesty, being seen in print by someone who had seen him in the room, and he felt things he didn't immediately put anywhere. He put them where they belonged, which was in the room with her. He called her. "The paper is extraordinary," he said. "Thank you," she said. "The case study," he said. "The resistant patient." "Yes," she said, the smile in her voice. "I'd like to buy him a drink," Marco said. "He doesn't drink much," she said. "One drink," he said, for finally having words. She laughed, her real laugh, the one that was quick and warm and which he had spent the better part of a year being disciplined about. "Deal," she said. He hung up. He sat in his study, the books, the single lamp, the city outside the windows going on and on in its enormous way, and he thought about the particular quality of his life in the present tense. Not the folder, not the archive. The present tense, which was something he was learning to inhabit with the patience of a man who had come to it late and intended to make up for lost time. He was not clean. She was not unaware. They were not finished. With the legal situation, with the city, with each other, with the ongoing and never completed work of being two people who had found each other in the specific way they had found each other, which was not a simple way. But they were starting, and in the present tense, in October, with the lake going dark and the city burning at its edges and everything still to come and everything already behind them, starting felt like exactly the right word.